everyone to our April program for the Powell-Liberty Historical Society. We're really excited to see the chairs filled. Maybe we'll have to even put up some others before this is all over. I'm Sherry Carmichael. I've been with the Historical Society for a long time. And but for tonight's program, and because of the 250, and because of April, anyway, we thought that the perfect program would be to hear from Paul Revere. Now, our Paul Revere is actually Brent Carson, and he is known all over Delaware County as the Mr. Delaware History. He was a teacher, a history teacher of 6th graders at Willis Middle School. How many years?
31.
31 years.
Good job.
Yes. Right. And he has produced books and videos. How many videos?
We've done two
Just
main ones. Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
And your second book, is it out now?
It is not quite out, but almost out. But it is, yes. And it's going to be on Rutherford B. Hayes, the first 14 years of his life when he lived in Delaware County.
Wonderful. So keep an eye out for Mr. Carson's publications and so forth. And we are extremely thankful for you to be here tonight with us to present Paul Revere.
Thank you. Thank you. Paul Revere, he is absolutely one of the most fascinating people in the history of this country. What he did was absolutely amazing. It wasn't just April the 18th. It was throughout those early years of the Revolutionary period. But I want to start out, obviously, with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. That poem was written just before the Civil War. We'll get into that here just shortly after the poem. Listen, my friends, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April of 75. Hardly a one is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, "If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft from the belfry tower of the Old North Church as a signal light. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. And I on the opposite shore will be ready to ride and spread the alarm to every Middlesex village and farm for the country folk to be up and to arm." Then he said good night, and with muffled oar, silently rowed to the Charlestown shore just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide in her moorings lay the Somerset, British man of war, a phantom ship with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hawk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friend, through alley and street, wanders and watches with eager ears, until in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms, the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. Then he climbed to the tower of the church, up the wooden steps with stealthy tread to the belfry chamber overhead, where he started the pigeons from their perch on the lonely rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade. By the trembling ladder, steep and tall, to the highest window in the wall, where he paused and listened and looked down a moment on the roofs of the town and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath in the churchyard lay the dead in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that you could hear like a sentinel's tread the lonely night wind as it went creeping along from tent to tent and seeming to whisper, "All is well." For a moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour, the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead, for suddenly All his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats. Meanwhile, impatient to mount and ride, booted and spurred, on the other side walks Paul Revere. Now he pats his horse's side, then turns and tightens his saddle girth, but mostly he watches with eager search the belfry tower of the old North Church as it rises above the graves on the hill, lonely, spectral, somber and still. And lo, as he gazes on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to his saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. The hurry of hooves in a village street, and a spark, struck out by that steed in its flight, kindles the land into flame with its heat. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil, broad, and deep, flows the mystic, meeting the ocean tides. And under the alders that skirt its edge, now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It is 12 when he crosses the bridge at Medford town. He hears the barking of the dog and feels the damp of the river's fog that rises after the sun goes down. It is 1 when he gallops into Lexington. He sees the gilded weathercock swim in the moonlight as they pass, and the meeting house windows, blank and bare, gaze at him with a spectral glare as if they've already stood aghast at the bloody work they'll look upon. It is 2 by the village clock when he crosses the bridge at Concord town. He hears the bleating of the flock and the twitter of birds amongst the trees, and feels the breath of the morning breeze blown across those meadows brown. And 1 lays safe and asleep in his bed. Who at the bridge will be first to fall? Who that day will be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball? You know the rest from the books you've read. How the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball from behind each fence and barnyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again under the trees at the bend of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. And so through the night rode Paul Revere. And so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance, not a fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore, for born the night wind of the past, through all of our history, to its last. In the hour of danger and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. That's the poem. Well, regarding that poem and all that history, the reason he wrote that near the beginning of the Civil War was he was pulling at the heartstrings of the country. I mean, it had been many years since that war there in the 1850s. And what he was seeing is the country is about to come apart. And we're about to enter a fight between ourselves, and this great experiment is going to totally disappear. And so he wrote that to try to convince people to remember what they all went through, and that we have to do something to get this stopped before it's too late. And that was his purpose in writing that. Now about the poem. The poem had all kinds of mistakes. There was a lot of misconceptions, that he added into there. And it was a fantastic poem. But as far as its accuracy on some things, no, it wasn't exactly the way it should have been. And there were other riders. He wasn't the only rider that night. There were many riders that night. And they had riders for years for all kinds of reasons, not just in Boston area, but in Connecticut and New Hampshire and all the other surrounding places had riders. But there was never one like Paul Revere. As far as that evening is concerned, those all kinds of things like he never saw the lanterns that were hung. Well, he didn't need to. He's the person who was responsible for getting it started. He's the one who went to the church, told the person who was already arranged to get up there and light the lanterns. And then he took off. Well, of course, he was already on his way. By the time the lanterns were hung, he was already on his way. Others saw the lanterns. It's important that he had it. That strange thing about the Old North Church, though, of all things, when the Reveres came from France and moved to Boston, and Paul's father was 13 years old, and then Paul grew up there, and at the age of 15, he got a job at the Old North Church with several others. There were 6, I believe, in this particular group. They rang the bell for the church. Now, when I say rang the bell, they didn't just ring it. It had to be rung in certain ways because that bell was announcing all kinds of things, and they had to know the order, how it was done. And the 6 bell ringers, he was one of them. Some of them remained friends for the remainder of their life, who were in that particular group. He didn't even attend the Old North Church, but he got a paying job as a 15-year-old. But back to this poem and all the things about it. As far as the person wandering around and getting the information, there were people doing that. To set this setting, Boston was a split city. You had almost as many British sympathizers who didn't think we needed to split away versus those who did. They all had spies. They all were checking out everything that's going on. Of all things, too, here's one. Paul Revere, in his home, which is still standing in Boston, the homes were his next-door neighbor. And when I say next door, I mean the buildings were right beside each other. There was no yard between them. His next-door neighbor was a man by the name of John Pitcairn. John Pitcairn ended up being the leader of the forces who went to Lexington for the British, leading them, and then to Concord, and then to Bunker Hill, was killed at Bunker Hill. And imagine, right next door to him is Paul Revere. Did they know about each other? Oh, I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. But all of these spies going around and trying to make sure they knew what the other group was doing. And so, like on the side of the Patriots was the Committee of Correspondence and the Committee of Safety. Revere, John Hancock, Sam Adams, those were all some people, just some of the people who were involved in that. But Adams, Hancock, Revere, they were right there from the beginning and right there involved in all of that. You also had other people like William Dawes. We'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, you can imagine the setting in Boston at that time. And as the word spread now that the troops may be on the move, that the message got out, and they were ready to put those lanterns. And that church, the Old North Church, had many more British sympathizers than they had patriots living or going to that church. So it was a dangerous job as the minister of the church, or the not the minister, but I guess more or less the manager of the details of the church, he lived close by. And he also had a small tavern-like down below in his house. He and his wife ran, and the main customers were British soldiers. And they were there that night, the tavern. And he had to make the excuse to go to bed. He said, I'm going to bed, and his wife continued on. Well, he went upstairs to bed, but he dropped down out of the second floor window to get Revere's message and then get it over to the church, and they went up. I can tell you also, though, that some of the other big mistakes in the book, for one thing, Revere didn't even have a horse that night. But he knew he wouldn't have a horse that night. He had a horse, but he knew he wouldn't have, because remember, he went across the bay. I don't know if you ever knew this. You cannot put a horse in a rowboat. The horse was waiting for him on the other side. They had found a horse called Brown Beauty, which was quite a horse. And that's how he got across. He didn't row across. He had somebody row him across. At the very last second, before he left the house, his gun was laying there. His pistol was laying there. He thought about grabbing it. Then he thought, no, I'm not going to grab that. That probably saved his life from what ended up happening. But he got across that bay, and just as the moon was rising, and luckily it hadn't risen quite above all the buildings, and there was almost above, because he did not dare be spotted by the British ship, the Somerset, because there were people watching the bay. It was a no boats out night. But he's out and taken his rowboat across. They take that rowboat across almost under the nose of the ship. And they were not spotted because the moon was not up quite high enough to reflect off of the water there. They made it across. Other things, though, about it. He didn't ride the farthest that night. William Dawes, he was assigned to ride a longer route out around the bay one direction, and Revere instead was going to go across the bay and then go from a different direction. Dawes' trip would be farther that night. But that's because Dawes always went that route on regular trips across and knew some of the British who ran the checkpoint. And when they saw him coming, waved him on through. And he had a slower horse also. And he just sort of dawdled along, didn't raise any suspicions. And he made it. The other thing they say, he rode farther and didn't get caught. But he doesn't get the publicity. There's more to that, though. For example, when Revere went across, he almost got caught, not far into his trip, but he managed to outgo them, and took a little different route himself. Dawes, on the other hand, both of them had a main thing that they had to do. They had to get to the Clark house over near Lexington and warn them of what's happened. Because in that house was John Hancock and Sam Adams. They were inside that house that night. And they said somebody has to get to them. If they get them arrested, when they get to Lexington, it could destroy even the whole idea of a plan for revolution. Everybody of the British knew Hancock and Adams, and they were real instigators. And so they said, we got to go different routes. There was probably even a third person trying to get there that we know never made it. They don't know what happened to him. But all along the route, though, the difference between Dawes and Revere was that Revere stopped regularly all the way along. He had certain places that he had to go. Let me tell you also, everybody knew Revere. They may not know Dawes, but they all knew Revere. All of your main revolutionaries knew him. The British knew him. In fact, they referred to Revere as the ambassador to the Continental Congress because of all of his writing that he was doing. And Dawes, on the other hand, as far as records show, there is no evidence that he actually ever stopped anywhere along the way, except perhaps one. And even that person, they're not sure. They just assumed because he was on that route that there was probably Dawes that stopped there. He said some man by the name of Lincoln. I don't think it was Abe Lincoln, but he thought it was Lincoln, maybe, who warned them. And we know some of this, too, because of the fact that some of the people on his route, some of the area on his route, never got word that it was taking place until later. And they weren't out and away until later. And whereas Revere stopped numerous places, Dawes had a little longer route. Revere had a shorter route, or shorter route, but lots of stops. And when he got there, Revere got there first. And when he got to the house, there was a guard out in front of the house. And he yelled for them to get up. And the guard said, to lower your voice, there are people sleeping in this house. Clark's family of kids, Adams, Hancock, and he raised his voice even louder, and he said, there's going to be a lot more problems if they don't get up. All of a sudden, a window pops up. And then other windows are popping up. The kids are looking out the window. And he pushes forward and knocks on the door loudly. And now Adams and Hancock, in fact, Hancock says, Revere, is that you? He said, come on in. And he went inside and he told him what's happening, that the British were on the move. The British were on the move. The regulars are out. It wasn't the British are coming. It was the regulars are out. They're on the road and they're on their way over here. And you must get out of here. They're going to be searching all of these places for all of the supplies, all the weapons, and for you. Well, so he got there, and then a little later, then Dawes arrives. Well, then after that, they moved on. Both Dawes and Revere moved on towards Concord. And as they moved, that's when they got caught. When I say they, I don't mean they, I mean Revere. Dawes was with him. He managed to get away. But he lost his horse. It ended up injured, and he ended up way on foot. I believe it was also Prescott, William Prescott, who also was along, and he was doing a lot of riding. He got away. Dawes went one way, he went the other, and Revere got caught. And when they caught him, immediately, they knew who he was. And these were officers of the British. And they were asking all kinds of questions of him. And they were intimidating him about all of this. The one thing about Revere as a writer, the reason he was chosen so much for writing was because when he found out the information and they told him to make a ride, he was accurate on every little detail of what he was supposed to say, what he was supposed to pass on. And he was unflappable. And when the British were talking to him, he was telling them everything. He didn't hesitate at all. He spoke right up. And they even had a gun to his head at one point while they had him arrested. And didn't bother him at all. He just kept on talking. The next thing you know, the tide was turning. He's outnumbered. They have the guns to him. The next thing you know, in what he's telling and what he's saying to them, they are now the ones who are worried. They're worried about what's happening. And he told them factually what had happened to the forces that were coming across to attack. For one thing, they came across that bay. Remember that line in the play? The line of black that bends and floats in the rising tide like a bridge of boats? Well, it was a line because they tied the boats together. 5 at a time coming across. And they were so stupid, I hate to say that word, but they were, to take them across in an area that they thought was a little more dark, a little more better, where it became shallow. The boats are packed with people standing. There's no room to sit down. So the soldiers are brought across standing. They get close to the shore and they have to, now that they're stuck, they have to wade ashore. Northeast, April. The weather there is a lot colder than here. Around the Boston area and that whole area, they had to wade through that water with their hands holding the guns up. They get across, and now they have to wait for the supplies to be unloaded. And they had them loading, and typical of the British, they got them all across finally, and they're all in a big congregation, and now, proper British order. We got to sort this out by section. It took them more than 2 hours to get it all organized. Now they have to wait for all the supplies. Whenever those supplies arrived, finally the march began. And these people are cold. They've been out in the water. Then they get to a bridge that they had to cross. But there were people living nearby, and they didn't want to attract them. So instead, they said, we can't take you across the bridge. That'd make too much noise. We're going to have to cross that stream, get out in the water again. This water is even deeper. And they walk across this, and now they have to gather again and wait for another hour. They were absolutely freezing before they could begin the march. And so there was some time for them to get everybody warned. Let me tell you also about all of these villages and places. All of them had militias. They'd had militias, some of them for 100, 150 years before that. And they were very independent. They had a militia leader in their village, but that was an elected leader by their group of soldiers. And he'd better not try to tell them to do something that they didn't want to do. That they would agree to certain things. This was true of the militias. And so after the announcement reached Lexington, yes, they had gathered, and other places were gathering because of all these other riders who were out. And the messengers were getting far distant from there. And so they got out. Revere and Dawes were moving towards Concord. But Concord by this time had already been warned. So they never actually made it. Besides, he got caught. Then after he gets caught, then after that, and he gets into this long conversation with them, and the next thing you know, it's the British officers who are running away. The Reveres left. They decided to leave him there. They took his horse, but left him on foot. And he and Dawes headed out again eventually. They met up. Then he heads back. They never make it to Concord that time. Instead, he heads back towards Lexington. And when he heads back towards Lexington, someone spots him there whom he knew and said, the British are not far away, and Hancock's papers are in the top floor of the tavern. And we must get them out of there. And it's a big, heavy chest, and it's packed. If they get the papers of everything that we have been doing, we're in trouble. And so Revere and this man rush to the tavern, and they get up, and it is a heavy tower. They have to get it from the second floor down to the first floor and then out of the building. And as Revere looks out of the building, there they come. The British are headed for the green. And they managed to get it down. The local militia was already lined up. They were lining up there. And here comes this man and Revere dragging this chest across that square right in front of all these soldiers of the British militia, or the local militia, while the British are starting to come in. And they managed to get it all the way across and hidden in the woods. Revere never heard the first shot, or he never saw the first shot. He heard it, but he was not back for that. A little bit more, though, about Revere and his writing and how much he did, how much he was involved in all this. From about 1770, for about 5 years before Lexington, he was writing all over the place. He was always the choice for a long, hard ride. There were others willing to do it, but no. They always chose Revere because they knew he would answer. Although he was on the side of the Patriots, he would give a straightforward account of what he was supposed to say to these places that he went to. And so, as a result, they liked that. He was also probably the best writer. He had trained outside of the city of Boston for a long time, and he was hired to write. They paid him. But every account I've ever seen also said they paid him, but he could have received a lot more than what he asked for. Talk about rides. I brought this with me, a couple things about a few events that he rode to announce. Well, for example, the early one was in 1770, the Boston Massacre. Now, Revere was also a person who did engravings, did printing. He was a dentist. He also was a blacksmith, about 5'10", broad at the shoulders, very husky hands because of that type of work that he was doing. And also, they even make comment, and because of all the writing he was doing. After the Boston Massacre, they had a painter paint the scene. Of course, you didn't have photographs. Communication was everything in these early years, too. I mean, you think of social media today and of all, of getting the news out and on whose opinion news you're getting. Same with the British and the Patriots, trying to get the news out and to get their slant on it to make sure. And so when the Boston Massacre took place, they had to get that word to New York right away. Get the word to New York. So they had a person paint the scene, and then he made an engraving of it, and then he ran off broadsides of it, and he rode, unlike when we think about Lexington and who rode further, Dawes or Revere, was it 15 or 20 miles? He rode to New York with this, putting up broadsides all the way, handing out this sheet to get that news out. The distance of New York to Boston is about, I think I even wrote down the distance that it is. I think that it is a distance of about 200 miles by horseback. And he got it there right away. He also got it there quicker. Always they were talking about how much quicker he got there than they expected him to get to these places. And he would have to trade horses along the way. Sounds like the Pony Express, except Pony Express kept switching riders and horses. He would switch horses some, but he was always the person to take it all the way. And he reported the Boston Massacre taking place. Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party. A little bit about how that all got started. I always thought the Boston Tea Party that they went down, they took they quickly threw these over, but they painted themselves as Indians so that they wouldn't know their identities. The way that started that evening is they went to Faneuil Hall. They were going to go to Faneuil Hall, but they realized Faneuil Hall is not big enough. We have to take a vote on this. Are we going to dump that tea and refuse to pay those taxes or not? So they had a meeting on it, and they had that at Old South Church. It wasn't as much British, and it also was bigger, and they could fit a bigger crowd there. Well, they had a crowd. 7,000 people showed up at that. Now, they didn't have 7,000 seats. Most were outside. But inside, it was packed. And the only ones allowed to vote were the men, who were landowners. No women, no servants were allowed to vote. And it was a wild scene. And finally, when he said, okay, we will take the vote. And the vote was taken by either aye or nay. And there was a roar that went up. Kids, women, servants, everybody voted aye. And then he quickly said nay, and then he hit it because nobody was in favor of not doing it. And then they all went down to the wharf to watch the 150 or so who were chosen to actually go on board and throw the tea over. Among those was Paul Revere. He was right out there in the middle of all that, and everybody knew it. And that he boarded the ship. I always thought maybe it was an hour or so to throw him over. Oh no, it was all night. The crowd didn't stay all night, but the 150 on the 3 ships that were there, they were there all night getting this. It was a tedious and very physical job because these chests were at the bottom of the ship, most of them. They had to get them up, and they had, let me see, I think I even wrote down the figure here as to how much they had. Well, they had 342 chests of tea, 46 tons of tea that had to be taken off those boats. And so they worked all night long, as well as Revere. And sure enough, when the morning begins, the next morning, we got to get this word to Philadelphia and New York. And they had some volunteers willing to do that. Obviously, they were not going to choose any of those volunteers. Revere, you are writing. And of course, he was the writer to take it that distance. How far was it to make this trip to New York, to Boston, or to Philadelphia, and then back? Oh, I guess it was around 700 miles of writing to get that information to those places, to make sure that they got the news of what we've done. And that was typical Revere doing all that. Then there was, they even had a song. We don't know what the word, we know the words, we don't know what it sounded like. But this was the one passed around all through, particularly the working people, the North Enders, the ones who were doing all the work down along the shores. They had this poem about the Boston Tea Party. Rally Mohawks, meaning they'd all worn the disguise of the paint. Rally, Mohawks, bring out your axes and tell King George we'll pay no taxes on this foreign tea. Then rally, boys, and hasten on to meet our chiefs at the Green Dragon, the Green Dragon. Our Warrens there, and bold Revere, with hands to do and words to cheer for liberty and laws. Our country's braves and firm defenders shall ne'er be left by true North Enders fighting freedom's call. Then rally, boys, and hasten on to meet our chiefs at the Green Dragon. And that was a song sung all over Boston talking about that. And who did they mention in all that? They mentioned Revere in there. That next morning, after having worked all night long, unloading those, he immediately left for Boston on horseback. It was an 11-day trip that he made on his horse to get there, and on horses to get there. And then also, I believe there was one other that the Suffolk Resolves in 1774, those were closest you could have to declaration of war, that the people of the area of Boston and Suffolk County had said, we are not paying your taxes, we are not doing this, we're not accepting your goods. And they got that to the Continental Congress to let them know what they had resolved. And of course, it was Revere who took that to them. So no wonder the British were referring to him as the ambassador to the Continental Congress. And the last one was on December 12th and 13th of, that would have been in 1774 at the end of the year. They got word that the British are bringing ships and they are going to confiscate all the weapons they can find throughout New England, particularly New Hampshire and Fort William and Mary. And so when that word got out, Revere, get the message up there. Get the message up there to New Hampshire and let them know what they're about to do. And of course, then they had to discuss it, up there. And the immediate thought, yes, we must get to Fort William Mary because they are going to come and take all the weapons and the powder that's stored there and take it with the British. Now, the commander of the fort was a British person. Of course, it was a British fort. But still, they're going to come and get that out of there. And so they sent people up to get it. Commander of the fort heard about them coming, and so he reinforced his forces there. He originally had 4 people in the fort. Now he has 6 people to defend that fort. They had the cannons. They had all the powder. But the Patriots had hundreds of people who came and swarmed over those walls and took everything. In 2 days, they had tons of powder. I think it was 340 some barrels of powder, plus the cannons. They took them out, got them to the shore, and they took them away before the British got there. There were shots fired. None of the Patriots were killed. A couple of the British, I think, were wounded, but they got them out of there. They lay claim that was actually the start of the Revolution. People up in that area say it wasn't Lexington, it was up here, but that was before. My point being then that Revere was in the midst of everything throughout this revolution, that he wasn't just writing on the night of April 18th. He was known as the writer And I think of him as being one of probably the greatest people of the Revolution would have been Paul Revere. Other writers, they took short trips, but they didn't do the long ones. And it was always Revere who they turned to for all of this. I got a lot of this out of a book. I read several books on it, but this latest one by a man by the name of Kostya Kennedy, put out last year, The Ride, Paul Revere and the Night That Saved America, is what it was called. Do you have questions? Or how am I doing on time? I probably out-talked you. But anybody have any questions?
Did his wife go with him?
No. His wife, and he was, as I say, he was paid for these too. And his wife, his first wife had passed away, and she had, I forget how many kids she had. Then he remarried, then he had kids by her, and they were living in the house. And so she stayed, and then also his mother came to help because of these long trips that he was making during that time period. But that was the way it was. But, yes?
We've all read that book, and it was great.
You read that book? It was great, you said? Yeah, it's quite a book, as were a couple of the others that were written about it, about all of that. But yes?
Are you familiar at all with his involvement in the later years of the Revolution?
He was early on involved, but I don't think he was as much involved later. He was into the printing and all of that. He was involved in that way.
That he was court-martialed for some kind of, I don't know the specifics, of a Navy fiasco and exonerated.
I heard that too. Yes, I did hear that. Yeah, I don't know much about that, but yeah, that was true. Yes, that's true. He was involved in all the. I forgot about that incident, but that incident where he was court-martialed. Yeah. But,
That was in the book.
I'm sorry?
That was in that book.
In that book. I need to reread it again. He died at the age of 83. So he lived.
He died what?
He died in 1818 at the age of 83.
Fresh air was good.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for letting me be here. You're welcome. Last year I did that ride.
Yes.
I didn't ride a horse. I had a couple assistants help me. They really helped me. They made the outfits. And these are cohorts of mine from my teaching years. Gina Neer and Kathy Verne. Well, anyway, we rode through Delaware County on the 18th of April last year, which would have been the 250th anniversary. And we rode in a car. We started at about 6:45 in the morning. We went for 10 hours riding around just Delaware County. We made 26 stops. We crossed the Concord Bridge on the side of the river and went to the EMS or to the fire station there. Went to a lot of fire stations, the EMS stations, police stations, sheriff's offices, and some other places. But because they're first responders, and Revere was an ultimate first responder at that time, that we went there and I gave the poem and we gave a short version of Paul Revere. But, thank you. Yes. You had a question or comment?
Did Paul have more than one horse, and who owned the horse? And how much did a horse cost?
I'm going to take those notes down and go back and ask him. I don't know on that, but I know that he had a horse.
Okay.
But when he made these long trips, he would switch them out too. And so the night that he rode a horse by the name of Brown Beauty,
Okay.
which was a horse that they had set up for him on the other side, and it was an exceptional horse that night. They said the way it
But if you owned a
rode.
horse, you had property, and they were cheating.
Well, I know they could eat a lot of oats, but
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.